Hello and welcome to Stories of Science. Here, we look back on humanity's long journey to understand the world. The questions, the failures, and the breakthroughs that slowly changed how we see the universe and ourselves. We tell science as stories.
The man who unlocked the secrets of DNA, Oswald Avery's forgotten legacy. You've probably heard the word gene tossed around, but do you know who first told us, hey, DNA is the real star of heredity? That's right, not proteins, but DNA. Today's story is one you don't want to miss. We often talk about genes and genetics as if we've always known how crucial they are to life. But what if I told you that DNA, the so-called star player, was once completely overlooked, even dismissed by scientists as the true genetic carrier? Surprised? Yeah, it wasn't until the 1940s that scientists started to realize that DNA, not proteins, was the real hero in genetics. Enter Oswald Avery. This man, nearly single-handedly, turned the scientific world upside down. You're probably wondering, how did he do it? Well, let's dive into his journey and see how he went from a low-key scientist to one of the founding fathers of genetics. Let's rewind to the late 1930s. Back then, scientists universally believed that the genetic material couldn't possibly be something as simple as DNA. After all, DNA looked too basic. The consensus was that the complex, structure-heavy proteins were the true carriers of genetic information. Even the big names in science were stuck in this mindset. Proteins were the genetic heavyweights. But Avery? He was like a scientific detective, not afraid to challenge the established norms. He knew that science's true power comes from questioning what everyone takes for granted, digging into the overlooked details. In the late 1930s, Avery started quietly working on an experiment to figure out how bacteria swap genetic material. This experiment would ultimately lead him to a mind-blowing discovery that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. DNA is the heart of inheritance. So how did Avery do it? Let's take a closer look. His experiment involved a bacteria called Streptococcus pneumoniae, which, you might have guessed, causes pneumonia, a disease that had claimed countless lives. Avery meticulously ran a series of experiments and found that this bacteria could accept genetic material from another bacterium. But here's the question: what exactly was this genetic material? Avery's breakthrough came when he honed in on a substance called the transforming factor. His experiments revealed that this transforming factor was none other than DNA itself. Can you imagine? For years, scientists had been convinced that proteins were the key to inheritance, and here Avery was, pulling back the curtain on the real culprit, DNA, a simple molecule that had been dismissed as unimportant. It was a discovery that shook the scientific community, almost like realizing the Earth isn't flat, but round. Avery and his team, Marcia McCarty and Ralph McLeod, used a series of complex experiments to prove that DNA is indeed the carrier of genetic information. This was huge. It meant that heredity wasn't carried by proteins, it was DNA that held the key. This discovery practically rewrote biology, making Avery a pioneer in molecular biology. But despite this game-changing discovery, Avery didn't exactly become a household name. In fact, when Avery published his groundbreaking paper in 1944, titled The Chemical Nature of the Substance-Inducing Transformation of Pneumococcal Types, it was largely ignored. Some scientists even dismissed his findings as mere coincidence. Can you believe it? Some even thought it was an accidental breakthrough, like finding your lost keys in the kitchen. But science doesn't shy away from doubt. That's its magic. Eventually, the truth comes to light. In the 1950s, when Watson and Crick proposed the double helix structure of DNA, their work finally gave Avery's discovery the recognition it deserved. By now, you're probably thinking, Avery wasn't just stirring things up in the lab, he was causing waves in the scientific community. He was the type of scientist who didn't follow the rules. It was as if he was telling the world, rules? I've never heard of them. His bold, precise experiments paved the way for others, eventually changing our understanding of genetics and laying the groundwork for revolutionary breakthroughs in gene editing, gene therapy, and even modern medicine. But here's the twist: Avery's life wasn't just fascinating in terms of science. In his personal life, he was the epitome of the low-key genius. He never married and wasn't known for any social scandals. In fact, most people knew him as a workaholic. His friends joked, Avery is probably the only person who gets stuck talking about genetics in a bar. But despite not seeking fame or recognition, Avery laid the foundation for the future of science. So, the next time you hear about gene editing, gene therapy, or even genetic testing, remember this unsung hero, Oswald Avery. He may not have been in the spotlight, but he changed the course of genetic research, and in turn, the future of our health and lives. His story isn't just a chapter in the history of genetics. It's a testament to the power of quiet, persistent discovery, because Avery didn't just reveal the secrets of DNA, he opened the door to future scientific revolutions. So, let's give a well-deserved nod to this underestimated hero, whose work continues to shape our world today. And with that, let's dive deeper into his journey. Oswald Avery was born in 1877 in a small, almost unknown town called Hamilton, New Jersey. Back then, it was just another typical American town on the East Coast, nothing special. Imagine growing up in such a quiet place, with no prominent family background or obvious signs that he was destined to become a great figure in science. His father, Joseph Henry Avery, was a regular businessman, and his mother, Mary Avery, was a homemaker. For a middle-class American family at the time, their life was pretty typical, nothing extravagant. In many ways, Avery's childhood seemed just as ordinary as any other. But it was this very humble beginning that shaped the man who would go on to make history. If you've heard the stories of other famous scientists, you may have noticed that they often come with a sparkle, early signs of genius, family support, or prestigious backgrounds. But Avery didn't have any of that. He wasn't born into a family of intellectuals, and he wasn't recognized as some child prodigy. Avery's story is more about persistence and self-made success, a reminder that extraordinary paths often begin from the most unremarkable of places. Avery's journey wasn't about being a genius right out of the gate. In fact, he didn't show any signs of exceptional talent in his early years. His academic path wasn't filled with aha moments like the other prodigies. He wasn't the kind of student who instantly stood out. Like many of us, he started small. He attended public schools in New Jersey, where the academic environment wasn't exactly nurturing. It wasn't a place that offered him any special advantages. He had to rely purely on his own efforts and interest. But by the time he reached Columbia University, Avery had started to show potential. He wasn't an obvious genius student, but through sheer hard work and determination, he earned his bachelor's degree. Columbia was one of the top universities in the U.S. at the time, so just getting in was an accomplishment in itself, a testament to Avery's academic abilities. After graduating from Columbia, Avery didn't immediately dive into the medical field. Instead, he chose to explore the intersection of medicine and chemistry. This cross-disciplinary background would prove crucial for his future success. When he earned his MD from Johns Hopkins University, he had already developed a keen interest in bacteriology and immunology. Back then, bacteriology was still in its infancy, and much of the science around bacteria and their relationship to disease was still rudimentary. It was during this period that Avery began to realize that bacteriology wasn't just a subset of medicine, it held far bigger secrets. At Johns Hopkins, Avery took a less conventional route. His curiosity about how bacteria caused disease and how they infected the human body grew stronger. He wasn't just looking to earn his doctorate, he was driven by an insatiable interest in how bacteria could alter genetic information. At a time when bacteria were only seen as pathogens, Avery began to see them as part of a much bigger puzzle in genetics. It was here that he began to focus on the intersection of biology and chemistry, and these early explorations laid the groundwork for his later breakthroughs. By the early 20th century, Avery's career took a major turn when he joined the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research. At this cutting-edge research facility, Avery truly began to engage with the forefront of bacteriology. Back then, scientists had a very limited understanding of bacteria, even the term bacteria wasn't fully defined, and many of its characteristics were still unknown. Avery, however, was a scientific explorer at heart, eager to venture into the unknown. At Rockefeller, Avery's work quickly found its focus. He started studying bacterial transformation, essentially, how bacteria could exchange genetic material. The scientific community at the time believed genetic information was passed through proteins, but Avery began to question this. Could there be another, more fundamental substance involved in the process? In the 1950s, scientists started to realize that genetic information wasn't transmitted the way they'd always thought. It wasn't about complex proteins, it was DNA. And Avery's collaboration with British biologist Frederick Griffith was a pivotal moment in this journey. Griffith had discovered that bacteria could absorb foreign material and change their genetic traits as a result. Avery took Griffith's research a step further and proved that this transforming factor is DNA. Can you imagine? At the time, DNA was barely given a second glance. Proteins were the celebrated stars of genetics. Avery, however, proved that this simple molecule was the true carrier of genetic information. This discovery didn't just make Avery a prophet of his time, it laid the foundation for modern molecular biology. You could say he was like a quiet revolutionary, silently driving a massive change in genetics. Although his findings didn't receive widespread recognition in his time, Avery had shown the way for future scientists, proving that sometimes, you need to challenge the established theories to uncover hidden truths. Avery's impact on science, however, wasn't just theoretical. It was deeply practical. His work in bacteriology and genetics opened the door to breakthroughs like gene editing, gene therapy, and even the study of molecular genetics. While he might not have been recognized in his time, the path he set has deeply influenced everything from modern medicine to agricultural biotechnology. Avery's life, much like his work, was quietly profound. He never married, and he wasn't known for socializing or making headlines outside the lab. In fact, his friends joked that Avery was probably the only person who could get stuck talking about genetics at a bar. In the end, Avery's legacy is undeniable, even if it wasn't fully recognized in his lifetime. Today, when we talk about gene editing or gene therapy, Avery's discoveries are at the very core of these technologies. So, let's take a moment to appreciate this humble hero, whose contributions continue to shape the world we live in today. Avery didn't just crack the code of genetics, he set the stage for the scientific revolutions that followed. His story is a reminder that sometimes, the greatest discoveries come from the quietest places, and the most revolutionary ideas can come from the least expected sources. Oswald Avery's groundbreaking discovery didn't come from a big eureka moment, it all started with a twist of fate. You've probably heard of Frederick Griffith's famous experiment, right? Griffith, a British biologist, stumbled upon something strange. Bacteria could transform, meaning they could take in genetic material from other bacteria and gain new traits. In simple terms, he found that bacteria could exchange genetic information. It almost sounds like a superpower, doesn't it? But here's the kicker, this was just the setup to a much bigger story. Griffith's experiment didn't explain how genetic material was transferred, it only showed that bacteria could swap certain substances. The big question was, what exactly were those substances? Enter Oswald Avery, a scientist who wasn't exactly a household name at the time. His job wasn't just to repeat Griffith's experiment, it was to dig deeper and uncover the real mystery behind it. Avery took Griffith's work and expanded on it, ultimately revealing the true identity of the transforming factor, DNA. Now, imagine this, back in the early 1940s, scientists knew very little about DNA. The prevailing belief was that the complex molecules, proteins, were the ones responsible for carrying genetic information. DNA, on the other hand, seemed too simple to be the key player. But Avery blew the lid off that assumption and boldly declared, "Hey, you all thought DNA was just a dull little molecule, but it's actually the real carrier of genetic information." For biologists of that time, this was like an ice-cold slap in the face. Everyone had assumed that proteins were the genetic stars, and DNA was just a sidekick. Imagine being told that everything you thought you knew was wrong. Avery used the one thing that scientists do best, experiments, to deliver a resounding rebuttal to the established ideas. Through meticulous research, he cut through the fog and pointed straight at DNA, a molecule that looked ordinary but was, in fact, extraordinary. You might be thinking, that doesn't sound too complicated, right? Avery just had a flash of inspiration, and bam, problem solved. But here's the thing, it was far more complex than you might think. To really grasp what Avery did, Think of it as a modern-day scientific spy mission. His mission? To uncover the true identity of the transforming factor. Avery used the most advanced scientific techniques of his time to carefully isolate and purify DNA, running a series of intricate enzyme experiments to prove that DNA was, indeed, the genetic carrier. This wasn't just random chance in the lab, every step was calculated and precise. It was like a scientific treasure hunt, with Avery unraveling one puzzle after another. At the time, Avery's work was so advanced that many scientists doubted it could succeed. After all, scientific progress is often met with skepticism. Imagine being that relatively young scientist trying to convince the scientific world that something as simple as DNA could be the key to understanding genetics. It was a bold theory that seemed almost impossible. At that point, proteins were still regarded as the undisputed champions in the genetic game, while DNA was considered a mere bystander. Avery's theory was like a thunderclap that shattered the old scientific worldview. And that's why, despite Avery's world-shaking discovery, his findings weren't initially accepted by most scientists. Picture this: you've just invented a brilliant new device, but everyone around you thinks it's not going to work. In the scientific world, doubt always comes faster than acceptance, especially when new theories challenge long-held beliefs. But Avery didn't back down. He kept pushing forward, letting the data speak for itself. By 1944, his paper was finally published in the Journal of Experimental Biology and Medicine. The title might seem simple, but the content completely changed the course of genetics. For the first time, DNA was no longer considered a mysterious substance, it stepped into the spotlight as the true genetic material. Avery had done it, he'd cracked the code of genetics, and DNA was no longer just some obscure molecule. However, despite the monumental impact of his paper, Avery didn't get the widespread recognition he deserved. You might be wondering, how could such a breakthrough not earn a Nobel Prize? The truth is, Avery's discovery was largely overlooked at the time, and he never received a Nobel Prize. This is a bit of a tragedy because Avery's work laid the groundwork for everything that followed in molecular biology, directly influencing the development of modern genetics. Though he didn't win a Nobel, Avery is undoubtedly one of the most underrated scientific heroes in history. His research not only paved the way for Watson and Crick's discovery of the double helix but also laid the foundation for the explosive advancements in genomics, gene editing, and modern biotechnology. Avery's influence is far-reaching, and his name deserves a place in the history of genetics. Avery's story is a reminder that sometimes, the most groundbreaking discoveries come from quiet, unassuming places. It's not always the loudest voices that make the biggest impact. While he may not have had the recognition he deserved during his lifetime, Avery's legacy is woven into the very fabric of modern science. From gene editing to DNA fingerprinting, all of these innovations trace their roots back to his groundbreaking work. So, the next time you hear about genetic research or gene therapy, remember to tip your hat to Oswald Avery, a man who changed the course of history with a quiet determination and a relentless search for truth. Oswald Avery's scientific breakthroughs were more than just landmark discoveries, they were revolutionary. They fundamentally changed how we understand genetic inheritance and laid the foundation for much of modern biology. Looking back at Avery's life, we can't help but ask, what would genetics and molecular biology look like today if Avery hadn't revealed that DNA is the core of heredity? Avery's research was the key that unlocked the door to modern molecular biology. Imagine a world without Avery's work. Watson and Crick's famous double helix model might never have been accepted as quickly as it was. At that time, the scientific community hadn't fully recognized DNA's central role. But Avery, with his precise experiments and solid evidence, brought this discovery into the public eye. DNA, this seemingly simple molecule, went from the quiet confines of the lab to the center stage of science. Avery's work set the stage for the genomic revolution that followed. Without his pioneering experiments, the birth of genomics might have been delayed, and our understanding of genetics could have taken decades longer to develop. Avery's contributions also paved the way for revolutionary advances like gene editing, DNA fingerprinting, and gene therapy. The CRISPR tools you hear about today, the gene therapies being used to treat diseases, and even the DNA fingerprinting technology used in crime investigations. These cutting-edge technologies all trace back to Avery's hypothesis that DNA is the carrier of genetic material. Think of Avery's work as a seed that he planted. Today, that seed has blossomed into a wide array of scientific advancements. However, despite the immense importance of his work, Avery never received the recognition he deserved. Most notably, he never won the Nobel Prize. That fact feels almost unjust, given how much he contributed to the revolution in genetics. Many science historians even argue that Avery is one of the most underrated Nobel contenders in history. If he had been rewarded in his time, who knows how different the history of biology might have been. Imagine, a man who changed the course of science didn't receive the recognition he deserved. It's truly a shame. But scientific progress is never about the awards, it's about the explorers and pioneers who push past conventional thinking. Avery's legacy has long outlived him, influencing fields across the board. From genetics to medicine, from agriculture to forensic science, Avery's discoveries continue to offer new perspectives and breakthroughs in our daily lives. In medicine, his work helped propel the development of gene therapies and personalized medicine. Today, many genetic diseases can be treated through gene repair, and many cancer therapies are tied to genetic research. In agriculture, the development of genetically modified crops is also deeply influenced by Avery's legacy, helping to address global population growth and food security. And in forensic science, the widespread use of DNA fingerprinting has provided crucial evidence in solving countless criminal cases. When you look back on the history of genetics today, you'll see Avery's fingerprints everywhere. From his groundbreaking discovery that DNA is the carrier of genetic material, scientists have drawn inspiration from his research, pushing biology forward. Many of today's biological breakthroughs are built on Avery's work. Scientists continue to walk the path he laid, solving more of the mysteries of life and inheritance. Even though Avery didn't live to see the recognition he deserved, his impact on science is irreplaceable. His discoveries laid the foundation for many of the studies and technologies that shape our modern world. Today, we use gene editing technologies to treat diseases, DNA fingerprinting to solve crimes. All of these advances are rooted in Avery's work. Avery's story isn't just the tale of one brilliant scientist, it's a crucial chapter in the history of science. He didn't just unveil the mysteries of genes, he paved the way for future scientific discoveries. Every conversation Avery had with science was a deep exploration of the unknown, and each step he took served as a lighthouse, guiding future generations deeper into the scientific ocean. We might not be able to list every detail of his experiments, but his work undeniably laid the groundwork for the scientific progress we enjoy today. Imagine today's world, where you can take a genetic test to trace your ancestry or receive treatment for genetic diseases. These advances were made possible by the roads Avery paved long ago. Even though he may not have received the applause he deserved, his contributions are deeply embedded in our everyday lives. Today, when we look back on Avery's life, we should ask ourselves, has this overlooked hero received the recognition he truly earned? Should we give him the acknowledgement he's long deserved for his tremendous contribution to science? In the long run, many of science's great discoveries are often made by quiet pioneers, and Avery is undoubtedly one of the most important among them. His story, though understated, profoundly impacted the future of biology.
The people who change the world usually just think one step deeper. If this story made you see things differently, hit like, subscribe, and save it. See you in the next story.